Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. Today we're going to talk about diagnosing hardware issues on your computer and how you can troubleshoot them and figure out what's going on. And to start the video, I am going to read this lovely email that I got the other day from a fellow who was seeking help. And when you send a message to somebody, then you're asking for help, it's always good to give them a lot of information. And this fellow, he wrote such a well-worded email that I was able to figure out what was going on right off the bat. So we'll talk about that after I read the email. It says, "Dear Joe, I am a long-time and avid viewer of your YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Flattery will get you everywhere. I am using Linux for last few years and used it on my compact laptop quite well. I primarily use Linux Mint and OpenSUSE. But today something strange happened. When I was using Linux Mint 18.2, I was unable to connect to my Wi-Fi network. It was working just fine moments ago in another distro I was running on the same laptop. Then gradually all my distros were unable to connect to the Wi-Fi. They all can detect it, but cannot log into it after I put the password. I have not changed anything in my Wi-Fi router, and my other devices can access it. I tried to reinstall, i.e. Mint from a USB stick, but there it also had the same problem. Other distros had the same problem when I used them from the USB stick. I've done an exhaustive internet search, and it seems to me that my Wi-Fi firmware got corrupted somehow. My question is that diagnosis correct? If it is true, then please guide me to how I can fix that. If that diagnosis is not true, then also guide me how to find out the reason and fix the problem. I'd be very much obliged if you reply promptly. Thanks and regards, Sudip in India." Well, it was pretty obvious right up front that the problem that Sudip was having with his compact machine was not software-based, it was hardware-based. Figuring out problems with computers is usually a process of elimination, and the very first question that you have to ask is it the hardware or is it the software? And the line between what is hardware and what is software in a computer is very fuzzy. So I got enough information here to know for sure that it wasn't Linux Mint 18.2 causing the problem, because the same issue was popping up with other operating systems he was trying to boot on the same machine. So the first thing that I instructed him to do was to do a cold reset of the system. And that's mainly what I want to talk about in this video today, because you would be amazed at how many hardware issues can be resolved very quickly just by resetting the entire system. However, modern computers make that a bit difficult to do, because when you power off your machine, you are not actually powering it off. What you are doing is putting the system into a very deep, deep sleep. We're not talking about suspending the machine. That's a different ballgame. When you shut down the machine, you tell your operating system, okay, go through your shutdown procedure, and then the motherboard will put the machine into a deep, deep sleep. A lot of these little devices that are hooked to it, like your Wi-Fi card, your video card, your sound card, your hard drive controller, the SATA bus, USB controllers, all that stuff, it doesn't actually turn off. It just goes to sleep. So restarting the computer doesn't necessarily fix problems with hardware. So let's jump in here and talk a little bit about restarting, resetting, and the different levels of doing this sort of thing. So I have a little list that I have worked up here. Now, all of us are pretty much familiar with the idea of shutting down our computer. Now, we're not talking about suspending it. Suspending it is a different ballgame. That's when the computer goes to sleep. It turns off the display. It turns off most of the hardware in the computer, but it keeps whatever you're working on in memory. And when you tap the power key or press the spacebar on the keyboard, the machine wakes back up. It springs back to life, and it just picks up where it left off. A shutdown means that the operating system is ready to have power completely removed from the system. So when you shut down your Linux machine, and most of us are familiar how to do that from a desktop, what it does is it goes through a procedure. it goes through and it tells all of the programs that are running, all the little services running in the background, to stop what they're doing, write out any data they might be holding in memory to the hard drive, and then prepare the system for power off. If you don't go through that proper procedure, there is always the chance that you could A, lose data, or B, corrupt the system. And the reason why that is because all of these little programs, they might have data in memory that has not yet been written to the hard drive, and if it doesn't get written to the hard drive, it just goes poof. So if you're working on a big graphics thing, you have a big presentation open up you're working on, and you suddenly lose power to the machine, when you reboot the machine, you might not find it there. Some big programs like that have recovery, which means that they're always saving things in the background as you work on them, and then when you reopen it, it might say, give you a message like, there was a document that you were working on, would you like to recover it? Why, yes, but even in those situations, usually you're going to lose something. And then corrupting settings and data on the computer, that happens because if the machine does not shut down properly, some garbage might get written to the hard drive. You might actually have a file that's corrupt, it's unreadable. And if that happens to a setting, some sort of configuration file on the machine, you can boot it up and then all of a sudden you find that this doesn't work or the settings are wrong or something like that. So you want to do a proper shutdown if you can. What happens if your desktop becomes unresponsive, as I have said here? Well, if I actually mistyped this and said if you desktop becomes unresponsive, but you know what I meant, then you can hold down the alternate control and F1 or F2 keys, log in with your username and password, and issue the command sudo reboot or sudo power off. Now, those of you who have been working with computers for many, many years may know about the old three-finger salute, which is alternate control delete. Sometimes that works in Linux, and sometimes it doesn't. It's not necessarily going to give you the results that you think it would. So this is actually the more proper way of doing this. So let's actually go through this procedure so I can show you how it works. And this is only to be done if you can't, log out normally. Like this desktop, it was working just fine. So if I go in here and I click on the shutdown button, I get lots of options. If I would click shutdown, the machine would shut down. But if the desktop is not responding, then how are you supposed to do that? Well, it might be a situation where the desktop itself is not responding, but that doesn't mean the computer isn't working. So you can switch to another terminal and then you can log in. So hold down alternate control and F1, and this is what you're going to get. Now you'll notice that if I do F2, the number goes up. We're now on TTY2, which is teletype. That's what TTY is short for. Back in the early days of Unix computing, the machines were actually hooked to teletype for, input and output, so that's why it's called a TTY, but it's also known as a terminal. So I can just go up here. I can go F3, I can F4, F5, F6, and when I get to F7, look, I'm back on my desktop. That's because when your computer booted up, it put the desktop on TTY7, and then it started a graphical environment. But all of these other terminals are available to you. So we can always jump over and log in. When you type in your password, you will get no output on the screen. That's normal, and it looks like this. Now, for those of you who are looking at this video on low-resolution devices, I know this is very small. I apologize for that, but this is the way it renders on my screen in a virtual machine. So if my desktop wasn't working here and I wanted to restart the system, we're assuming now that there's something wrong with the desktop, then I would issue sudo reboot. Put my password in. And now the system will reboot, and it'll take me back to the login screen. If I'm going to shut down to do a cold reset, then I would use power off instead of reboot there, and then I would have the machine shut down properly, the operating system. So there you go. I can log back in to Linux Mint, and hopefully that fixed the problem. The fictitious hypothetical problem we're talking about here in this video. So if you can't shut down the computer from the keyboard, there's just no way to do it. It won't take any input. The keyboard's dead, the mouse is dead. How are you going to shut down the machine? Next thing that you can do is to do an emergency soft reset or a warm reset. Now, what that does is it essentially, we override the commands from the operating system and we tell the motherboard, just go to sleep. Just stop doing what you're doing and then go to sleep, which will just make everything that's in memory for the operating system go poof. The hard drive will stop spinning, or the SSD will stop working, whatever the deal is, and your computer will be ready to have power removed from it. Now, in this situation, if you do a soft reset, what's going to happen is that it's just like pulling the power from your machine as far as the operating system is concerned, because it won't have a chance to write out the data that's in memory. So you could lose a little data. There is the slight chance that things could get corrupted, but if there's no other way to shut down the computer, then this would be the way to do it. So you hold down the power button for 5 seconds and the machine then shuts itself down. So, as we stated, this is not actually the machine completely being shut down. So if you have a problem with your Wi-Fi card, your video card, your sound card, which are all on the motherboard, or maybe they're on a PCI slot somewhere, it doesn't matter, and the little chips in there are not working properly, you'll need to do a complete reset. And in that case, we shut down the computer. We go through one of the shutdown procedures we just talked about. And then we remove all power from the machine. So if it is a laptop, you would unplug the power cable and you would actually remove the battery. Laptops always have that battery as a backup, so just unplugging the power cable does not actually reset the system. So unplug the battery. Now let it sit there for at least a full minute, and then plug the power back in, reinsert the battery, and reboot the computer. In a lot of cases with hardware problems, and this happened in the case of our friend sudo that we talked about in the first part of the video, this fixed the problem. Everything was fine. So what happened there? Well, these little cards and little chips that are on the computer that take care of these functions, they're actually little independent computers that are just working with the main computer. And they have chips in them, and any number of things can cause those chips to stop working properly. They could get a little power surge. A cosmic ray could come in from outer space and blow out their buffer memory. They could get too hot. Anything could happen, and then they just stop working properly. A full reset fixes the problem in many cases. I've had machines through the years that have had sound cards that would do this. Just reset the machine. It would fix the problem. One time there was a very funny situation I ran into with a server, and I'll tell you that story at the end of the video because I did not go through these proper procedures before freaking out and trying to fix the problem, and I ended up making it much worse than it actually was. So I'll tell you that story at the end. But this usually fixes the problem. Now, there are a couple of other things to talk about here. USB devices are notorious for crashing this way because all a USB device is a piece of hardware that's hooked up through the USB bus. Now, in your machine, the USB controller, it's one of those independent little computers, and all it does is just manage USB devices that are plugged into the machine. And sometimes USB can be quite frustrating. Sometimes the system just doesn't see it. Sometimes restarting the computer doesn't help. Sometimes a full system reset is the only way to reset the USB bus so it will actually see the device. So there are a couple of commands that you can run just to look around and see what's going on. I'm going to show you these real quick, just so you know what they are. The first one for USB devices is that you can get a list of all of the present hooked up running USB devices on your Linux system with a very simple command, and all it is ls USB. And here are all of the USB devices that are hooked up to this machine right now. The first one listed is my Wi-Fi adapter, and then you will see there is an IBM keyboard hooked up, and then there's the Logitech device, that's my wireless mouse, and then you'll also see C Media Electronics, that is my microphone that I'm actually recording this video with. So if you run LS USB, you can see real quick what's hooked up to the machine. Now it doesn't tell you whether it's functioning properly. The USB device might not need to be reset, unplugged, and plugged back in, that sort of thing. But at least it'll tell you if the machine is actually seeing it and if it can use it, because it will list it here. Another command that can be very useful is lspci. And this essentially lists all of the hardware hooked up or integrated into your motherboard. Now this spits out a great deal of information here, but let's see if we can look through here and parse some of it out. And you can see that this machine that I have is really mostly Intel. I've got an Intel CPU. Let's see if look at something else that jumps out here. Let's see, we have, well, the PCI bridge is right there. Let's see, what else have we got here? You can see that I'm using an NVIDIA video card, and it tells me exactly what it is. It's a Quattro FX 580. Yeah, it's kind of an old card, but it works well. And then I'm also using a RAID controller on this system, and it says that it's in RAID mode. So you can get a lot of really good information out of here. Some of it is just stuff that's hooked up to the system. And when you're looking at the lsusb command, you'll notice that we have a bunch here that are Linux Foundation 2.0, 1.0, that sort of thing. That is just the driver for the bus before you plug it into the USB slot. That's all that's showing you. And on my machine, you see that I have 12 USB ports available. So there you go. That's just a couple of little commands that can help you to get started figuring out what your problem is. And sometimes when you ask for problems, then you ask for help with problems, somebody will tell you to run these commands and then copy the output and send it to them so they can see what's going on the system. So that's good stuff to know. All right, let's see, what else did we want to talk about here? Well, I did want to tell you that story at the end of the video. Well, one more thing I did want to point out was that when I set up my desktop machines, my desktop computers, I always plug everything into a power strip that has a surge protector on it. Nice to have a UPS, an uninterruptible power source plugged in, but if you can't do that, at least have a surge protector on there in case lightning strikes close to your area. So that should, catch the surge of electricity, and hopefully it'll blow out before it gets to your power supply and blows that up. But one of the nice things about doing that is that if you do have to do a cold reset of the machine, all you got to do is just shut the thing down properly and then turn that off and wait a minute and turn it all back on. And if your printer and your other devices are hooked in there as well, it will do the same thing for them, because just like computers, printers and scanners do not have a full shutdown, or the power's not completely taken away. It just goes into a standby or a sleep mode. So sometimes you can have the same issue pops up with a printer. Something goes crazy in there, and you can be troubleshooting it and going crazy and trying to fix it. Just resetting it will fix the problem. So this is always where you start. You want to start with your reset. I will put this in the description for the video in case you want to copy it and paste it and put it up on your wall at work for everybody or something like that, because when I was doing administration of networks, this was always the first thing I told people. Did you restart the computer? Oh, well, restart it. Let's see if that fixes the problem. And you'd be surprised how many times that I got out of having to get up out of bed and go into work at 2 o'clock in the morning to try and figure out what a problem was just by having somebody restart it. So there was this one situation that happened to me where I worked in a cluster of radio stations. We had 2 radio stations in the building, and we had this great big automation system that handled all of the audio. And one of the servers that this thing worked with was the audio server itself. And so this machine was critical. This is how we actually put audio into the system or would take it out. The local workstations in the studios, they had local copies of most of what we played on the air. So if this machine went down, it wasn't like, all of a sudden you're off the air on 2 radio stations. It wasn't like that. But there were some things that the workstations pulled from the server that if they weren't there, then it would be a problem. But anyway, this one day, this thing decides that it doesn't want to connect to the internet. Just does not want to connect to the internet at all. Just all of the workstations went into emergency mode, and they had warnings up on the screen that says, hey, I can't talk to the server. So I go in there, and of course the first thing I do is restart the server. No help. Still not seeing the network. It can't get on the local network at all. No internet, no nothing coming into this machine. Now I'm freaking out because it's like, this is really, really important. So what I did is, I ran and grabbed the phone, and I'm on the phone trying to figure out if I can order another network card for this machine, because that was the first thing that went through my mind was, oh my goodness, the network card has given up the ghost and it doesn't work and we're in major, major trouble. So I'm on the phone, and then I realized, it just hit me. I said, I never actually did a cold reboot of this machine. I have not reset it. So I hung up the phone because I was on perma hold with a hardware person. You know how that goes. So I just hung up the phone and went behind the rack and unplugged this machine, the power from it, and it went and it shut itself down. And I stood there and waited about a minute or two, whistling a tune, plugged it back in. These machines were set that if the power came back, they automatically rebooted themselves because it was in a radio station type environment. And the machine booted itself right back up, and it connected to the network, and everything was fine, and it never gave me another lick of trouble for the entire time that I worked there. I never had to replace the card. I never had to do anything with it. It was a one-time thing. Now, if you do have hardware issues like this, and this happens all the time, then that is indicating that there's something wrong with that piece of hardware. It's getting old. It's not functioning properly. Maybe it had a power surge at some time. Something zinged it. Maybe some of the components on it are failing. That will need to be replaced, and that's the only way to fix it. But always try a cold boot first. Go through a proper shutdown procedure. Do a cold reset. See if that fixes the problem, and then go from there. Thanks for watching the video. I certainly do appreciate it. Be sure and check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook, and check out freedompenguin.com for lots of really cool stories about Linux. Thank you, sudo, for your email, and thank you for all the feedback from everyone who follows this channel. It is very welcome indeed. We'll do it again soon.